There's not a way for an organization to shift things when we're working in our own silo. It takes the collective team to be able to make those shifts that are so massive when it comes to clinical and quality and safety outcomes. This fear of being viewed as a micromanager, which sometimes swings too far the other direction, and then we're not clear on accountability. Even those nuances in how we communicate accountability and expectations, it's a learned skill. It's not something that we're born with. It takes some time and some practice to be able to get comfortable with that.
Welcome back to Beyond the Bedside, where we dive deeper into the leadership stories shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Michael Duggan, CEO of Peak Recruiter, and today's episode is a masterclass in transformational leadership. Our guest, Laurie Smith, is the creator of the STAR method for elevating healthcare leadership impact. With more than 30 years of experience from serving as a System Chief Nursing Officer to coaching leaders around the world, Laurie has become one of the most respected executive coaches in our industry. But what really stands out are the measurable results she helps organizations to achieve. In a recent case study she shared, Laurie guided a C-suite executive and her leadership team through a major campus consolidation, an incredibly high-stakes moment for the system. Over just 12 months, that team reduced CLABSI rates by 80%, improved psychological safety for 93% of leaders, decreased turnover, and positioned the organization for Magnet and CARF accreditation far sooner than expected. Laurie doesn't just teach leadership, she transforms teams, cultures, and outcomes using neuroscience, organizational psychology, and her proprietary STAR method, a system that tackles everything from reactivity and silos to trust, adaptability, and strategic execution. Today, we're going to unpack the science behind her approach, the story behind that high-impact transformation, and the lessons every healthcare leader can apply right now. Laurie, it's an honor to have you on Beyond the Bedside. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Michael. I've been looking forward to this.
As have I. And Laurie, you've led through some incredibly high-stakes, high-visibility moments. And one that really stood out was the Norman Regional Campus consolidation. In the case study you shared, Norman Regional was preparing for a major campus consolidation. And what made that moment so high risk, and why was leadership alignment essential?
Yeah, there are a lot of mergers and acquisitions and realignments that are happening in organizations across the U.S. right now. And that oftentimes includes merging two different cultures, different ways of communicating, different ways of teamwork happening. Matrixed reporting often becomes much more complicated. We've seen a lot of flattening and leveling of hierarchies, and that sometimes adds to more matrix reporting and complexity there. Teams are continuing to grow. Span of control is very large. So those things in and of themselves, when you've had quite a lot of stability, are challenging. When you merge two different cultures together in different locations, that just amplifies the complexity times 10.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we see those things every day working with the teams we're working with. When you're stepping into those situations where you do have two teams or departments that are fundamentally different cultures, how do you even kind of begin to bridge that gap?
Yeah, well, there are several ways that we do that. Sometimes we do that through assessments that are qualitative and or quantitative. We do that through conversations with our key stakeholders, either one-on-one or as a team. We have some electronic ways that we gather information, and that's one of the things that sets us apart from many other coaching companies, is that we custom tailor our content and the design for the team. Mm-hmm. We've got a pillar, like you mentioned, that STAR framework that we know is proven and it works. And that's self-transformation, team transformation, adaptability, and results, STAR. Outside of that framework, the content can vary really widely. So we can't take one program we've done in one organization and transplant it to another organization. So to your point, really understanding what those nuances are for each individual team is what creates the success for the outcomes in the program that we have. We frequently hear from our clients, it's like you reached inside my brain and knew what I was thinking, but it's not magic, really. They tell us what it is that they need and what it is that they're looking for, and we just facilitate that growth. So it's the science behind it, the footwork in doing that prep to make sure we understand that specific team and organization and where the most energy for change is.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea. We'll dive further into the STAR method later today. I'd love to learn more about that, as I'm sure our listeners would. It's funny, getting to know where the client is case by case, that's so important. And as I call that alignment here, and it's clear that alignment isn't really optional in those moments. It's foundational, and it ties directly into another pattern that you had highlighted in that white paper. You talked a little bit about about how leadership teams operate in a constant state of crisis, or what we could call crisis culture, if you will. So my question would be, you highlight crisis culture and the lack of boundaries as two forces that can keep leaders reactive. How do you help teams, break those habits?
That is one of the most challenging habits to break, is being caught on the hamster wheel. And I frequently see leaders following their calendar. It's electronic or printed, and it's like a roadmap, right? We sometimes don't even question it. We just show up, we put our head down, and we follow the roadmap to where we need to go without pausing to question, is this the best use of my time? Can this be done without me? Can I trust my team to stretch and grow and fill me in where needed without micromanaging, but creating that accountability? I often coach my clients on the fact that your time and energy is finite. And if you think about that time and energy as a dollar bill, it starts to shift the way you think about things, right? You can spend 60 cents of your time and energy over here just putting your head down and following the roadmap, but that means you have 40 cents left for your family, for strategy, for following up on things that you're accountable for. Where is it that you want to spend that energy dollar, and how do you do that in a way that's meaningful and has a good ROI? It's not just frivolous on the hamster wheel.
Absolutely. Yeah, that really is interesting. I love that idea of thinking about the investment of our time versus just kind of going through the motions. Which I've worked with my team a lot on over the years as well, actually, because it's easy to get into those, just, hey, let's go through it, Mm-hmm. One of my favorite outcomes from your NRHS work, or the work with Norman Regional Health System, is this idea of the shift in psychological safety. And in the case study, you reported that 93% of leaders reported improved psychological safety. What interventions do you believe created that shift?
Well, first of all, I firmly believe in long-term work. I love workshops. I love conferences. I attend them, and there's great value in them. For deep, visceral, cultural change, that's longer than a conference or a workshop, right? And so our work over the course of 12 months with Norman Regional was a really great example of that. It takes time to develop trust and psychological safety. And it doesn't happen on the first day. Even as coaches, we have to earn the trust of those that are in our presence, right? It's not a given that because we're a coach, they trust us. We have to really earn that respect and that trust and that psychological safety. And the way that we do that is through creating alignment, through helping people to understand some of those common threads. What we frequently hear from teams is we're actually more aligned and have more in common than we thought we did, because the brain loves to fill in the blanks. If we don't have all of the information, we'll make up a story. Whether it's true or not is another issue. But our brain doesn't like to have missing pieces of information. 95% of what our brain does in a given day is actually unconscious, which is a crazy stat if you think about that.
Absolutely. That is insane.
What we do is unconscious, and 5% is a conscious effort. And the reason for that is the brain would burn through so much glucose and energy if it had to think about every word that we used, every step that we made, every breath that we took. It's sometimes why you drive home and you miss 4 blocks.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, I constantly go the wrong way all the time when I'm driving because I just go into autopilot constantly.
yeah, that's that
Yep.
unconscious part of your brain that says you have so much more to worry about. I've got this, right? Let me take the wheel here for a minute while you work through some of those other pieces, some of those other things. And so when we help people to understand the neuroscience behind how we frame the way we view our teammates, how we view the world, how we view the organization, and the psychology behind that, it becomes so much less mysterious. And it helps us to understand why we show up the way we do and why others show up the way we do. Especially in healthcare, we love to understand why. And that science side of things tying to our leadership behaviors really resonates with people. So getting down to the basics with that is one of the first steps in establishing that psychological safety and trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think there's so much power in that story that we tell ourselves, and you touched on it. I work a lot with my mindset coach actually on the stories that we tell ourselves for performance sake, to keep us, performing at a high rate here at Peak. It does take time. And so, gosh, over the course of a year, it goes by fast, but it's also a lot of time. And so I'm sure there's lots of ways that, that kind of idea of creating trust as a platform where adaptability can really take root is kind of a part of that. And you had written about helping leaders reframe change as well. Not as a threat, but, as an opportunity for growth. My question would be, I can only imagine that a lot of these conversations you have would be during emotionally charged transitions, perhaps. If that's the case, how can leaders help their teams remain, grounded and focused during those times?
Oh, that is one of the biggest keys. And it's the reason why the STAR model begins with self-transformation, our own self-awareness, understanding our own self-protective strategies and biases and unpacking that a little bit. There's also quite a lot of magic to being in the same room with your team. And it's not just the coaching, it's the water cooler talk, it's the conversations over lunch. I was just recently working with a team, and it was fascinating. Over the lunch break, there were a small group of them that realized they all had their own little apiaries. Bees.
Oh, okay.
Right? Who would have known that if they wouldn't have had the time to stop and connect in a little bit of a different way? I thought that was really pretty cool. And when we start making those human connections, it helps us to develop trust. It helps us to develop a different level of respect. So that piece of getting people together, understanding our own part in the greater system of things, and where we might be mistaken on some of those blind spots. They're called blind spots for a reason. We don't always see them. And how do we have that trusted advisory group of our peers to help us with that? Part of what we do is develop peer-to-peer coaching groups. And that's to help teach them to understand how they can coach one another, so that long after we are gone, after EHLI, Elevating Healthcare Leadership Impact, is gone, they can carry that work on and sustain that coaching model with one another, and also permeate that into the teams that they're helping to lead. Those are all ways that we help to have folks transition through some of those elements.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I imagine that just that awareness of why I think this, what others might think, how we coach, how we interact with each other as peers really helps that idea of adaptability and how that shows up and cascades into real operational impact over time and with the work you're doing. One of the things that struck me about the results there at Norman was really that the leadership work didn't just improve culture, it ended up improving clinical outcomes. And so many of our clients, of course, are extraordinarily focused on that, and for good reason. The results you helped them achieve were dramatic, right? 80% reduction in CLABSI, decreased turnover. What leadership behaviors were directly tied to these clinical outcomes?
Absolutely, an understanding of alignment and shared accountability and interdependence, that there's not a way for an organization to shift things when we're working in our own silo. It takes the collective team to be able to make those shifts that are so massive when it comes to clinical and quality and safety outcomes. The other piece of it is understanding the difference between accountability and micromanagement. That seems to be a theme, especially in the last year as we're working with teams across the US, is this fear of being viewed as a micromanager, which sometimes swings too far the other direction, and then we're not clear on accountability. I have a client that I've been working with, and they've been working really hard on not being a micromanager and trying to allow more of that autonomy, and through that, missing that clarity around who's accountable for what by when. And so the question of, can you have that to me soon, in one person's eyes might be, sure, that is within 30 days. And in another person's eyes might be a week. And then if you come around the next week to say, hey, where is that at? Now it looks like micromanaging because the expectations and perceptions were different. So even those nuances in how we communicate accountability and expectations, it's a learned skill. It's not something that we're born with. It takes some time and some practice to be able to get comfortable with that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it is a learned skill. This it's a part of leadership development, or could be. Sounds like when it is, it works great, but it is often overlooked, right, as a lever for improving patient safety and quality metrics. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people overlook the actual leadership development piece of why that's important to actually move the needle with the patient and the quality?
Well, there are a number of reasons, especially in healthcare. We see this a lot with clinicians, physicians, nurses, respiratory therapists, rehab folks. We take great clinicians, and because we're great clinicians, this happened to me, because we're great clinicians, they're going to be a great leader, right? And so we put them in these leadership positions, expecting them to have the same results that they had as a clinician, when in fact, those worlds are two very, very different worlds. There obviously is some crossover, but we take for granted the development that it takes to become a really strong leader, particularly with physicians. Some of the other clinicians have the opportunity to be a shift leader, a unit leader, a division leader. And oftentimes we're taking physicians and putting them right into large leadership roles, and they haven't had the opportunity to be able to make mistakes on a smaller level. So it's under the microscope and very public when some of these mistakes happen. And it's truly from that lack of ability to be able to stretch and grow over time and have that coaching and guidance and mentorship that is needed to move into those complex leadership roles.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you share that. That's been my experience working with clients as well. I see, this lack of accountability, going back to your previous point. And a lot of that, I think, stems from what you just mentioned, this idea that, oh, hey, this person's a great nurse, a great doctor, a great whatever, and I like them. And they've been here for 10 years, right? And all of a sudden, like, longevity equals merit to be promoted into a role that they're otherwise not prepared for. And it really doesn't set them or the team up for success. So I really have always believed and love this idea that, it's a different skill set, leadership. And if we're going to be promoting the clinicians, to be investing in them prior and or at least during their transition to help them develop that set of skills. A lot of what we talked about so far in this impact really traces back to the framework that you've developed. You've created a model that seems uniquely built for the complexity of healthcare. The STAR method is, I've referred to it earlier. But for those listeners who are, I want to know more about this specifically, can you walk us through the STAR method and why it's uniquely suited to healthcare complexity?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it all was really born from the fact that I started out in executive coaching by accident, actually. I was serving as a system CNO, and during COVID, needed to better understand how to help my team. I was pulling every trick in the book out that I had. And I was a seasoned leader. I had over 20 years of leadership experience. So it wasn't new to me. But this was unlike anything anyone I had worked with had ever experienced. And so therefore we were all novice at figuring out how to navigate.
It was a wild ride. Yeah, absolutely.
It was a wild ride, yeah. And so I had an executive coach at the time who was having an incredibly positive impact for me. And I thought, I'll become a certified executive coach to see how I can help my team through some of these things. And when I saw the impact it was starting to have for the team that I was working with, I started experimenting with a CNO and a CEO in Germany who we were partnered with through Magnet for Europe. And when I saw the impact that some of those elements was having for that team, I thought, this is really interesting. I wonder if we need more of that. And I was on the System C&E subcommittee for AONL. And what a resource to get a pulse check on is something that there's an appetite for. And overwhelmingly, yes, there was an appetite for looking at how can coaching help our teams on a larger scale than a workshop or a conference. And what does that look like for a sustained period of time? So I took a little time to survey a number of CNOs. I think it was more than 20 one-on-one, and just asked them some pointed questions around where were the areas they felt they had gaps with their leadership? What would they be interested in seeing? And a clear pattern emerged, which is where I developed the STAR method, beginning with our self-transformation, then shifting into team transformation, adaptability, and results. And those gaps that I identified also aligned with what I was learning in my executive coaching programs. I certified through the Hudson Institute and the Neuro Leadership Institute. And so all of the puzzle pieces were coming together. And when I developed this framework, I heard over and over again, well, it takes 3 to 5 years really for a company to take off. And I thought, what a great time for me to get my PhD then. So I started my PhD in organizational psychology and was learning, wow, this is also really coupling with organizational psychology. This makes a lot of sense for this framework. And within 18 months, we were fully booked. So that 3 to 5 year window was not true.
I think it shows just how much need there is out there for this type of work. Yeah.
Absolutely, there definitely is. And so what we see is when we understand ourselves, and this is proven science. This isn't just something that we've made up. The framework was very intentional based on what we already know from the neuroscience of leadership. So we know that when we begin with ourselves and understanding our own gaps and areas for improvement, we're better teammates. Not only teammates, when we go through these coaching engagements, we often hear from people, wow, so much of what I learned not only applies at work, but my family. I'm showing up differently for my family because we're a whole person no matter where we go. And these skill sets translate in both of those areas. So then you're a better teammate, right? But what does that mean? What does it mean to be a better teammate? How do we handle conflict? How do we handle the communication cascade and matrixed reporting and interdependence? And how do we rely on one another? How do we have our CNOs and CMOs and directors and managers view their peers as a team one instead of a siloed team one of those that report to them? How do we start functioning together in more of a lockstep fashion to solve some of these problems? And then moving into adaptability and change leadership. How do we do that in such a tumultuous environment that healthcare is in right now? How do we lead change when everyone's exhausted? Yeah, change fatigue is very real.
It is.
We're shifting again into this new era of healthcare and healthcare leadership. What does it mean to hold people accountable without micromanaging and to support autonomy and to really help people understand work-life integration so that they don't burn out? And then that final phase of the STAR model is results. It's at the end for a reason. We see a lot of teams that want to jump right to results and skip over the footwork of building that foundation of trust and psychological safety and getting comfortable with mining for conflict and accountability. And you really have to build those foundational elements before you can jump to results. And then when we get to the results piece of it, how do you sustain that? What does that look like moving forward once we get those results? And when we come against barriers that get in the way, how do we help to overcome those barriers and be a coach for our teams instead of a doer? We see a lot of that with leaders right now who are trying to be the doer when the subject matter experts are right there beside them. Tap into them. Those subject matter experts on your team know exactly how to solve the problem. We just need to listen to them and remove the barriers so that we can support that momentum.
Yeah, that all resonates deeply with me, is my experience in working with these folks. So interesting to learn a little bit more about that. In the case, and for our listeners, by the way, we will put the case study available in the notes, as well as a link back to Laurie's website for those of you who would like to learn more and to learn more about how this can help transform your leadership teams. But Laurie, I'm curious, in our AHS case there at Norman Regional, which part of the STAR method do you think had the biggest effect on shifting the culture and helping create collaboration?
Gosh, it was definitely elements of all of those, but I would say for them specifically, the team transformation side of it. When we had both of those cultures coming together, I think the perception was there would be more misalignment than there actually was. And when we got them in a room and started really doing some of those experiential exercises, and people could see the different perspectives and the thoughts and ideas that were starting to come through and demystify some of the things that had probably been preconceived notions and biases. That was one of the biggest pieces that we heard is, hey, we're more aligned than we thought we were, and we can support each other more than we could. And with Magnet and CARF, that was a classic example. That was a great example, is that the Norman Regional team was going to take sort of a smaller step toward both of those designations. And really what we saw as coaches was, you guys are ready to just go for it. And here's why you're ready to go for it. And as they talked through it, they realized that they were farther along than they thought they were through the work that we had done together. And that was a really pretty cool transformation to see.
Yeah, I bet that is cool, and kind of goes back to that story that we tell ourselves. It's going to be take too long, be too difficult, I'm not ready. And in this case, they certainly were more aligned, it sounds like, and much more ready to take on that challenge, which we all know getting those Magnet and CARF is going to significantly help them move forwards. That framework really ties into so many of, so many of the themes we spoke about together, right? Alignment, trust, adaptability, measurable outcomes. And I really feel like, for myself, it's just such an interesting way to think about and approach helping these leadership teams move forward on a case-by-case basis. So, Laurie, thank you again for sharing your insights, your frameworks, and the real stories behind the work that you're doing. What you've shown today is that leadership isn't an abstract, it's tangible. It shapes culture, it shapes performance, and ultimately it shapes the experience of every patient and every team member across the health system. Again, to learn more, you can visit laurielealeadership.com. There'll be links in the material for our listeners. And for our listeners, we will circle back. Hope this conversation has given you not just ideas, but tools you can take back to your own teams, whether that's interrupting crisis culture, building alignment, reframing challenges and opportunity for growth. These are the kind of conversations that help all of us lead with more clarity, more humanity, and more impact. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a colleague, and leave us a review. It helps us reach more healthcare leaders who are committed to transforming the industry from the inside out. This is Beyond the Bedside, a podcast by Peak Recruiter. I'm your host, Michael Duggan. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next time. Laurie, again, thank you so much for joining us today as a guest. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Absolutely my pleasure, Michael. Thank you for having me.